Let's how about we go to South Dakota and say hello to Lance. Welcome, Lance. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Eddie, love the show. Only reason I still have Sirius XM.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Lance. Thank you very much. I hope you find whatever you're paying for it worthwhile hearing our show a couple hours a day. It means a lot.
Oh, I sure do. And speaking of money, like you were just talking, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. I often hear you talking about the importance of bands having good songs, okay, which I completely agree with. Something maybe that new guys coming up might not even be aware of, something I've got firsthand experience with, and I want to get your take on it, is what do you think is the importance also of having deep pockets when it comes to getting a band going? Wouldn't you say somewhere within the inner circle, the band, family, friends, kind of to make it a little more clear, like when you were talking about Dirty Honey yesterday, and you're talking about they've got a record rep, and it sounds like they've got professionals around them, right?
Yes, not necessarily in the case of that band, Lance, not necessarily deep pockets, which, I'm sure there's a little money behind them, but in the story of Dirty Honey, and this is mentioned, by the way, in the Billboard article, which came out a day or two ago. For those that don't know what Lance and I are talking about, if you didn't hear the show yesterday, I talked a little bit about it. The band Dirty Honey, this new young band from LA who we had on this show a few months ago, has just had a number one rock radio song, and they still are unsigned. And people are trying to figure out how that happened. And the article even references this, that their manager, a guy named Mark Didia, who's an old friend, has a huge, long history in the music industry, ran Geffen Records at one point, worked for Rick Rubin, and their whole team, they've got a big publishing company behind them. They've got a company called Red Light Management behind them. There's a radio promotion there, guy there, also a friend, Mark Gorlick, who's worked their records, got a huge history in rock radio. So they have, while they may not have a record label per se, they have veteran, experienced, well-connected, former record label employees all as part of their team, and that's a big reason why they were able to get a lot of that, and the fact that they're good, of course, a big reason why they were able to get a foothold like this.
That is exactly my point and my question, because I went through this when my band was signed to an indie label. And you get to a point where all of a sudden everything is going to cost you a lot of money. And it kind of pertains to bands like you were talking about yesterday that maybe don't get any bigger. It also probably comes down to a lot of it's money, other factors. But that was my question right there. How did a band like Dirty Honey that nobody knows, no record label, somewhere in the echelon of what they've started from the time they started, somebody put some money into that band. Would you not agree with that, whether it be the band members themselves? Another example, something I'd heard long ago when Korn first started out, and they were touring with Ozzy, and a lot of people were shaking their heads and going, how in the world did those two bands, how did they come together? Now, I don't have any proof or anything, but I just heard that Korn had a substantial backing, like you have talked about. You've touched on buying onto tours, and which, yeah, but isn't there some more detail to that? I mean, to get the, how does a band buy onto a tour? How do you even contact, like Ozzy's management? You got to have management yourself with the money to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah, really. No, I get exactly. No, Lance. I get it completely what you're saying. I completely understand your question, and I'll answer it best I can. And thank you for listening. So here's the deal: money is a part. Money never hurts. If you're trying now, again, go back to what Lance just said at the top, because nothing matters if the band's not good. If the band's not good and the songs aren't good, and the band isn't, and by good, I mean they're good. They have good songs. They have good production. They have a good image. They look good. They're not all 100 years old that have been in bands forever for 30 years. Hate to say that, folks, but that works against bands. I always pride myself on however it plays out, whatever blowback there is, I give it to you straight and honest. And ageism is a huge thing in the music industry. It always has been. It always will be. What I mean by that is if you're a 55-year-old dude that's been knocking around for 35 years and can't get it going and putting a new band together, your odds of getting anywhere are exponentially. What's the word I'm looking for? Exponentially. I was going for a big word. It's a Friday. Should have bailed on that. Been a long week. Harder. Because you are prejudged. You don't have the image. You've been around for a while. You're old news. You probably had a couple swings. You're just not that good. If you were good, somebody would have discovered you already. I'm not telling you that's always how it is with that artist, but I'm telling you that's a big perception in the industry. So you got to be relatively young, meaning, in your 20s, early 30s, the latest. You got to be good. You got to have a good image. You got to have good songs. Okay, you got all that. Then you're looking at the intangibles. Money never hurts because you can do some things if you've got a pool of money to work from. But more importantly, and with the Dirty Honey story, I don't think so much of it has to do with actual money. I know for a fact, their manager I've known forever, and he would say to me, he's like, yeah, things are lean. There's not a lot of money he didn't back up the truck and drop a ton of money into the band like that. But here's what they had. They had connected people on their team, professional connected people that know what they're doing, who by them making a call themselves immediately constitutes credibility. Meaning if these people in their camp are behind a band, there's something real behind it. If you're in my position or a radio programmer's position or a band manager position where you're trying to get on a tour, the people that surround that band, if those people on their team make a call or ask for something, it's going to be taken a lot more seriously and legitimately than if it was just anybody, Joe Schmo, picking up the phone trying to get somewhere. Night and day. So that is a huge thing. Connected people, professionals with track records that can make things happen. Here's the thing about this story, because Left Sets wrote about this story. It was in Billboard. It's made the rounds the last few days. And I agree completely. I like the band, and I agree completely with what the singer Mark said. This is just good for rock, right? But you also have to look at this and have the full picture. And in essence, you can have basically a record label structure now without actually having a record deal. Meaning that a lot of management companies these days are set up in a way that they do everything in-house that a record label would do anyway. The old model for the record industry used to be you had a manager, and the manager dealt with the day-to-day with the band. The manager talked to the booking agent who booked the concert dates. The manager talked to the record label who worked the record and produced the record and dealt with the marketing and the promotion. And the manager is the hub for all of it, representing the band. That's how it used to work. The manager also set up the merch deal. So you go to a merch company, you make your deal for merch. The manager is the hub making all those calls. But all of these different arms are your team. Now, there's a lot of management companies that do all of those things under one roof. Or if not all, most of. They may employ former record label promotion people under their umbrella, or marketing people, or press people. So in essence, the management company, while not a traditional record company in name, is actually almost a record company, because the whole staff is old record company people, and they're doing all the functions that a record company would do. Now, if you are a band with a management team like that behind you and you get a record deal, then those people then fall back into more of a supplement role. They supplement what the label would be doing. So it's like a redundant layer of extra support. You may have heard about something called a 360 deal in the music industry in the last few years. 360 deal means you go and make a deal with a company where instead of, if you're a band and you make a deal with a company for merch, make a deal for booking, make a deal for record releases, you do all of that with one company, one-stop shopping. 360 meaning they've got everything now. All of your business is under one umbrella. So there's a lot of ways to do this now. But just having money is not going to get it done. Look no further for an example of that than the band, and we've talked about this before too, the Dead Daisies. It's no secret anymore. The main guy in the Dead Daisies is like a billionaire. His family owns Westfield malls around the world. So that guy can hire anyone he wants and do any marketing independently and hire any promotion and anything that he feels like doing. He can fly to shows on private planes, which he does. He can do anything he wants. He's got every financial resource available. But that band does okay, but they're far from where anyone would want them to be in terms of popularity, right? You got to have all the other intangibles. You got to be high. You got to be making great music. You got to be really good. You got to check all those boxes I said. You got to be young. You got to have a great image. If you're not doing that, if there's one part of the puzzle, it's hard enough if all of the pieces connect. If one or two of the pieces in the puzzle are a little off, it makes it way harder. So make no mistake, I am not in any way diminishing Dirty Honey having that happen for them. And it's great. It's a great story. It's great we're talking about another young rock band. I'm sure at some point it's going to lead to a record deal for them. But they would have to ask the question, do they even want a record deal? If you've gone this far, do you even want one or need one? Most established bands don't want or need them. A young band like them probably still does and definitely could benefit from one. But there's been a lot of people who said, well, how do they do that? Well, how do I do that? Well, first of all, are you good enough? And secondly, you not only have to have a staff, you got to have a staff that's connected and can call in favors and can bring legitimacy to something simply by the fact that you're associated with them. You see, that is the biggest problem, folks, is standing out from the crowd. I talked about earlier in this show, there's literally hundreds of thousands of podcasts. Very few of them have anybody listening. How do you stand out? How do you make yours known? There's a billion rock bands out there, or bands of any genre. How do you stand out? How are you different? How are you exceptional? There's a lot of ways to do that. The music's got to be good, but the team's got to be good. It's a complicated puzzle. And even if all those puzzle pieces fit, you still, at the end of the day, probably have to have a little luck factor in as well. Said it a million times. The good news is we're in a time and place where literally anybody can create in some way. The bad news is we're in a time and place where almost anybody can create in any way. leads to a very flooded marketplace, and only very few have people that actually are paying attention because it's made it way, way more convoluted.